The rain in Sector 4 didn't fall, it drowned. It was a thick, chemical slurry that smelled of burnt ozone and industrial solvent, washing over the carbon fiber canopy of my Night Stalker interceptor in relentless waves. I was 6 miles above the city floor, suspended in a vertical canyon of glass and neon that felt more like a tomb than a skyway. My HUD was a chaotic mess of scrolling red text and proximity warnings, the artificial intelligence in my brainlink screaming about heat locks and incoming kinetic energy. Behind me, the Silicon-Hounds were howling. They weren't dogs, of course. They were the Syndicate's high-speed aerial interceptors, sleek shards of obsidian-plated death designed for one thing: to erase anyone who dared to jump the corporate blockade. I had the Nexus drive strapped to the passenger seat, a small, pulsing black box that contained the encrypted bank codes of the top 10 CEOs in the city. If I made it to the fog line in the lower city, the insurgency would have enough credits to buy a whole new army. If I didn't, I'd just be another piece of falling scrap metal illuminating the midnight sky. The chase didn't start with a bang. It started with the high-pitched whine of a turbine spooling. I had just cleared the roof of the Aegis Spire when the first hound dropped from the clouds above. I didn't wait for a handshake. I slammed the throttle forward, the G-force hitting my chest like a physical hammer. My cybernetic spine hummed as it synchronized with the ship's flight computer, the world around me slowing down as my perception shifted into the high-pulse state. The neon signs for Somacola and Eternal Life blurred into long, jagged streaks of blue and pink light as I dived into the narrow gap between two massive residential towers. Vulture to base. I've got 4 tails. They're using active pulse radar. I'm going into the canyons. I yelled, my voice sounding strained against the pressure of the turn. Copy, Vulture. Keep your heat signature low. If you hit the static zone at the 3-mile mark, you can lose them in the interference. The hounds were fast. They didn't have pilots. They were controlled by a Hive-Mind AI that didn't know the meaning of fear or hesitation. They dived after me, their wings shifting into a low-drag configuration. The lead hound opened fire. Red kinetic slugs chewed through the air, hitting the corner of a holographic billboard and sending a shower of digital sparks and glass shards into the void. I yanked the flight stick to the left, the Night Stalker groaning as it pulled a 12G turn around a massive ventilation pylon. The air was thick with the roar of engines and the constant rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the Syndicate's heavy cannons. Missile lock. Missile lock. The computer's voice was calm, which only made it more terrifying. I glanced at the rear-view sensors. 2 hounds had opened their internal bays. 4 Striker missiles, trailing streaks of white-hot magnesium fire, were weaving through the rain, tracking the thermal signature of my main thrusters. I was trapped in a corridor of glass. To my left, the Zenith Hotel, a mile-high wall of reinforced crystal. To my right, the Industrial Hub 9, a vertical factory bristling with cranes and pipes. Not today, you toasters. I didn't bank away. I hit the air brakes. The Night Stalker shuddered, the nose dipping violently as the forward thrusters fired to kill my momentum. The world tilted. The 4 missiles, moving at Mach 3, couldn't compensate for the sudden drop. They flew past my cockpit, a blur of silver and flame, and slammed directly into the structural pillars of the industrial hub. The explosion was magnificent. A massive bloom of orange and black fire erupted from the building, the shockwave shattering the glass of the hotel opposite it. The 2 lead hounds were caught in the blast, their obsidian wings torn off by the debris as they spiraled down into the abyss. But the other 2 were still there. And they were learning. They split up. One stayed on my tail while the other pulled a high-altitude climb, intending to drop on me from above in the next open sector. I pushed the throttle to the red line, the afterburners igniting with a roar that shook my teeth. I was entering the neon gutter, the region of the city where the skyscrapers were so close together that the sun never reached the bottom. Here the signs were bigger, louder, and more desperate. Colossal holographic dancers 100 feet tall stepped over my ship, their translucent legs flickering as I flew through their data packets. Vulture, you're approaching the transit arch. It's a bottleneck. If they catch you there, you're pinned. I saw the arch ahead. It was a massive structural bridge connecting the 2 halves of the sector, a web of cables and maglev tracks. The hound behind me opened fire again, its slugs clipping my port side wing. I felt the vibration through my neural link, a sharp, stinging pain in my left shoulder. The wing was scarred, the carbon fiber peeling away in the wind. I see it. I'm going through the maintenance tunnels. The maintenance tunnels were a suicide run. They were barely wider than my ship, filled with pipes, hanging wires, and steam vents. I dived, the Night Stalker's belly scraping against the roof of a maglev train as it sped past. I entered the tunnel, the world turning into a strobe light effect of emergency yellow flares and shadows. The hound didn't stop. It followed me in. It was smaller, more agile. It was gaining. I could see the red glow of its optical sensor in my mirror. It was preparing its primary laser. A thin, violet line danced across my rear view, looking for the center of my reactor core. Sarah, Jax, if you can hear me, I'm about to do something stupid. I didn't wait for a reply. I reached for the manual override for the cargo dump. I didn't dump the Nexus drive. I dumped the decoy canisters, cylinders of highly flammable magnesium and chaff. The canisters hit the floor of the tunnel and tumbled. The Hound, moving at 400 knots, didn't have time to dodge. It flew directly over the canisters just as I fired a single thermal flare from my rear port. Carry-goem. The tunnel turned into a furnace. The magnesium ignited, the white-hot fire consuming the oxygen in the narrow space. The Hound's intake fans sucked in the flame, its internal processors melting instantly. The drone slammed into the ceiling of the tunnel, a ball of fire that lit up the entire transit arch like a second sun. I burst out the other end of the tunnel, the Night Stalker smoking and scarred but still flying. I was in the static zone now. The air was thick with electromagnetic interference from the city's power grid. My HUD flickered and went dark, the red text replaced by a soothing, empty black. I was invisible to radar. I was a ghost in the rain. I looked up. The fourth Hound, the one that had climbed, was still up there, circling like a bird of prey, but it had lost its lock. It was firing blind into the fog, the red beams of its cannons disappearing into the gray soup below. I dangled the ship into a steep, unpowered dive. I fell through the clouds, the neon lights of the upper city fading into a dull, distant glow. Below me the lower slums emerged, a forest of rusted metal and dim, flickering lanterns. The air was colder here, the rain turning into a light, oily mist. I leveled the ship out, the engines humming with a low, quiet thrum as I glided toward the hidden hangar of the Resistance. The Nexus drive was still pulsing in the seat beside me, a steady, rhythmic light that felt like the heartbeat of a new world. The chase was over. The sky was silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the canopy and the slow, steady beat of my own heart. I pulled back the manual hatch, the cold air of the lower city hitting my face. It didn't smell like ozone or solvent. It smelled like wet earth and old iron. I stepped out of the cockpit, my boots hitting the wet metal of the landing pad with a heavy, satisfying clank. The Night Stalker was a wreck. The wings were torn, the hull was blackened by fire, and the engines were hissing with the heat of the flight. But the drive was safe. The codes were ours. The city above was still loud, still bright, and still owned by men who thought they were gods. But down here in the shadows and the fog, the weight had shifted. The skyline was a fortress, but every fortress has a flaw. And tonight we had found the one that mattered. I walked into the darkness of the hangar, the Nexus drive tucked under my arm. The neon lights of the upper city were a million miles away, a fading dream of chrome and static. The siege was finished. The world was still broken, but for the first time in a long time, the silence felt like a victory. The engines are cold. The HUD is dark. The city above remains loud, but the vulture has found the shadows.